Hello and welcome everyone to this session of Research to Action. This session builds up on yesterday's session, where youth talk about youth-led action, and they were discussing with academics and international development organizations, and they present to us their findings and their recommendations. They talk about the challenges of the data cost, of internet access during the pandemics, and all the youth-led initiatives that are struggling with funding. So these were the main challenges they talked about yesterday. And they gave some recommendations, like they would like to see governments putting digital literacy in the schools curricula. They think volunteers can be recruited more often to assist youth-led projects. And some of our international development organizations recommend them, for example, to develop a platform for mentoring, to do partnership and advocacy in the local and national level. Like this, they can improve the youth leadership. So there was a lot of exchange in this sense, how to be a better youth leader using the capacities of our community and addressing these issues of the data cost, internet access, and the digital literacy. The purpose of today's session is to understand what actions can be taken to drive impact with youth-led civic action. We have today 4 policy experts who help us to understand how to put into practice these recommendations and findings of our youth team. I will explain to you how this will run. It's called a fishbowl session. So it's very simple. Everyone that wishes to join this session, you have to click in your button in the Zoom to raise your hands. After that, you're gonna write down your name and your question. And once you have your time to ask the question, a pop-up window will appear. You have to accept the invitation to become a panelist. Like this, when I will tell your name, you're gonna enter and ask your question to our policy experts. So it's very simple, and you have the right of having your voice and asking good questions to these experts that are here really to help us guide the research into action in youth-led civic action. So we're very happy to welcome everyone. And I will introduce to you right now the panelists. I'll give them the floor so they can introduce themselves and also give their thoughts about this session today. I'm very happy to welcome Juan Carlos Pulido, a policy expert in the Presidential Advisor's Office for Youth, and he's from Colombia. Bienvenido, Juan Carlos. You have to unmute your phone.
I think you can hear me now.
Yes, perfect. You can introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Juan Carlos Pulido. And in this panel, of course, I represent the government of Colombia in matters of youth policy. I'm a public server, of course, and I belong to an institution that is named the Office of the Presidential Advisor for Youth. This office is led by Juan Sebastián Arango, and of course, under the guidance of guidelines of the President of the Republic. I must confess I'm not very fluent in English, but I will do my best to interact and tell and talk about all the programs we're doing and how the COVID and the pandemic situation in Colombia help to empower people and develop new institutional development in the country. I don't know if in this section I should talk all about the we have done in Colombia, or this is just an introduction and then we go on. You tell me.
Okay, so it's a good introduction already. the youth can meet you very soon. I will pass now to the other panelist.
Okay.
It's Mr. Tijmen Rosenboom. He is Ambassador for Youth Education and Work in the Netherlands. Please, Tijmen, you can present yourself and say what you expect for the session.
Hi, yes, thanks a lot for this opportunity. I'm indeed Tijmen Rosenboom, ambassador at the Netherlands Ministry for Foreign Affairs, focusing on the issues of education and work, and also the voice of young people. That's why I'm very happy that we actually have this session and that the research, the work that the researchers has done, the Netherlands within our foreign policy. We really try to put the specific challenges and opportunities of young people at the heart of what we do. We call that our Youth at Heart strategy. And this is about investing in education, investing in youth employment, but definitely also about youth participation, because these things are two sides of the same coin. You cannot talk about education and work without addressing the issue of work, of a voice of young people and meaningful youth participation. So that's why this topic that you're discussing today and yesterday is very relevant. And I can tell you much more if you want, but I'll keep it here.
Perfect. It's very good to have people like you and Juan Carlos that are helping us to shape this discussion. And now I'm very happy to present Sue Wies. She's the Regional Advisor for Social and Human Science in Asia and Pacific, and she's working for UNESCO, and she's joining us in this session as well. Welcome, Sue.
Yes, hello, Fernanda. Hello, everybody. It's great to be here again. I was privileged to be able to be in the session yesterday and also to know a lot more about the young people's research. So looking forward to this. As Fernanda said, my name is Sue Wies. I work with UNESCO and coordinating the youth programs in Asia Pacific. And we're doing a number of different programs trying to support youth-led action, from the youth as researchers to another one we have called the Asia Indigenous Youth Platform. We also have the Youth and Sport Task Force. So trying to do, again, as with the other panelists, a lot of work to enable young people's passion and commitment to action to shine through. Look forward to the discussion.
So thank you very much for your presentations. Right now we are ready to start our fishbowl. I will recall you how you can join this discussion and ask your question. So you have to press in the raise your hands after you write your name, your question, and once your turn arrives, you'll be invited in a pop-up window to join this discussion. And like this, you're gonna be featured in the camera and you'll be able to ask your question. Right now, we have already our first person that wants to ask a question. It's Awel Akibe. He's our first young person that will address his question to the policy experts. Please, Awel.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Fernanda. Can you hear me? Yeah, my name is Awel Akibe. I'm the research lead for the Global Youth Action team, and I'm really delighted to be speaking to the policy experts today. We shared our findings and recommendations in the knowledge session yesterday. I have one major question to kick us off today, and I'll appreciate it if all the panelists could, policy experts, share their insights. One of our major findings was that 94% of our respondents, we collected data across 19 countries, in 4 languages. And we found out that 94% of our respondents, especially across Africa, Latin America, and Asia, experienced significant internet accessibility barriers that hindered their youth action in terms of employment and education. I would like to ask how the policy experts think that governments and international organizations and other key stakeholders can provide better internet access for youth-led organizations so they can maximize their impact. Thank you, Fernanda.
Thank you. So who wants to start? You have 2 to 3 minutes to each one to answer to Awel. Feel free to unmute your phone, your microphone, and answer. Tijmen?
Yeah, sure. I'm very. It's a very important point that Albert made. So thanks for raising that. I think generally, sorry, I have a bit of a connection issue, but yeah, this is better. We actually think that that digital literacy is of course absolutely crucial for young people. So this starts not only at a later age, but it has to start at the foundational level. It's one of the foundational skills that young people need to learn for increasing employability and for engaging in society as well. And that is why we also within a lot of our development programs, we focus on digital skills. This doesn't only mean coding and things like that. It actually also means learning, getting the skills to navigate the internet safely and the ability to assess online information. What we actually saw with COVID, and that's why this point is so important, and you saw an enormous push towards digitalization, of course. It was actually very often the young people who are able, and that's what I got from a lot of the meetings that I did and from the large virtual forum that we did with young people, actually noticed the positive role young people played, being also the ones who were actually coming up with the innovative solutions, being the ones who were able to make the digital transition, so to say. But it's not just an easy story, because we also saw, of course, how many people got left behind, exactly as you just mentioned. There's also an increased digital divide, so to say. So what we try to do, for example, with regards to education, we support an organization, quite some organizations, but I know from this organization called the Big Global Partnership for Education. It was actually working on the streaming of educational programs, but also working on the teachers, how to get their digital skills, so to say, up to a decent level, because they're the ones who then need to use those platforms. And I think that was also came out of the session yesterday. But again, this digital divide is a big issue, and we see it with children and youth living in rural areas. You see it with people working in an industry that is not able to make the transition to the digital world, or to find alternatives because they might lack the skills to find alternative employment. You actually see women and girls in certain communities, conservative communities, often not allowed even to use digital devices. So you see, and in addition, digital spaces can be discriminatory and divisive as well. So we really believe in the original promise of the internet as a space where people can meet. I think this session shows it. Through Corona, we also saw it, but we really mustn't be naive about, on the one hand, the technical issues that young people encounter, and how we should really focus on getting that connectivity first, because that is actually what we need. And we don't, otherwise we'll just widen a sort of new inequality worldwide with a large digital gap. And that is something that does worry me. So I know there's much to be said about this, but I hope that I explained a bit to Alwell what we try to do as well.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a very important input. Remember that teachers also have to be aware of the digital skills. I would like to pass the mic now to Juan Carlos Pulido, if you want to jump in and answer this question.
Yes, thank you, Fernanda. Yes, as our colleague said, it's not a very easy work to get all the population in countries like Latin America, for example, here in Colombia, with so many rural citizens and too many difficulties in the points of view of how different communities see the technology and the internet, knowing that, well, there are differences in the perspective, or in the view perspective of, for example, ethnic communities that have different approach to technology, and the cost of getting to every community in a country like Colombia that is a wide and big country. But I think one of the best things we can do, like from the government, is social dialogue. We have to go to the communities, talk with the communities, understand what are their needs, what are their perspective about technology, and how they want to to approach to technology. And that's what we did in Colombia, you know, with the COVID pandemic. All the young people were very frustrated with so many demands, legitimate demands, like technology access, internet access, job access, labor access, development entrepreneur ideas that requires technology for the access. So the best thing we can do in governments with limited resources is to have a open dialogue with the communities, understand what are their needs, and try to build use policy from use policy based in the needs and the perspective of the youth people. And from that point, we can plan budgets from short, middle, and long terms in order to can accomplish all those needs. That's how the Colombian government, that's how in the Colombian government we have approached these needs of the youth people. And I think we have very good results, or we have a lot of work to do. There's so many resources we have to budget, but we are working on it. And the social dialogue is very important to understand and build a route with the young people and the citizens.
Thank you very much for your complete answer, and for sure, including youth to talk about policies for them is essential. And now I would like to pass the word to Sue Weiss. Please, Sue.
Yes, hello. It's actually a very complex question, because how do you balance the cost of paying for a lot of internet with the impact that young people can make through their youth-led action? And there's a very real possibility that internet that's provided could potentially be used for movie downloads or gaming or other things. So I think it needs to be thought through. And one thing that comes to mind for me is, and I'm not suggesting that Facebook is the answer, but in the Philippines, there is a deal that if you use Facebook, there's no internet charge. So I think this is where youth have to work collectively, potentially with government organizations or through their own youth organizations, youth-led organizations, to negotiate with local providers to get some kind of internet package that is in some way subsidized. So this might mean that it's only limited or available for certain purposes or for certain people. I don't think there would be any possibility to get, you know, like national free coverage for internet. But I think there is a possibility that you could approach certain IT providers to do a corporate social responsibility kind of a program, which would mean that they would allow you a certain allocation. And it might be by cost, or it might be by bandwidth, or it might be, you know, controlled for certain applications. But I think it's really important to work collectively to be able to do something like that. Very small organizations obviously wouldn't have much bargaining power. And this is where the networking with youth becomes part of that solution too, to make that viable. Similarly, universities, if it's for education, could potentially band together to do some similar kind of deal with companies to provide it for educational purposes. So I think that overall, it needs to have some kind of limitations or focus to the supply of the internet.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to know, Falwell, you have something more that you would like to ask, jumping on what react to the panelists, some impressions, or we can move to the next.
Hi, Fernanda. So I have some other questions, but I can see my colleagues in the panelist chat, so I'd like to give them a chance first before I come back. Thanks to all the responses, very helpful.
Okay, so thank you. So I will pass the word now to Zinab Anwar. I think she's ready to ask her the question.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us the time today to speak about our policy brief. So our research also explored how the private sector are responding to this digital transitioning for youth livelihood. And some of our sample, they mentioned resistance towards this digital transition. Some of them thought it's not effective. They still prefer the traditional approach when it comes to, like being at the office. So from your perspective, what kind of policy that the government can carry out and implement and activate in order to incentivize these private sector representatives to embrace this idea of this digital transition for making a livelihood for youth as well, because at the time of the pandemic, those who were able to make a living from online channels or online platform really survived the financial impact that many of vulnerable communities take during the pandemic. So I would love to know your thoughts about that.
Okay, thank you for your question. I think Taiman or Juan Carlos, if you want to answer.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's a very important question. The private sector has a huge responsibility in the task of articulate with the government policies and the needs of the population. In Colombia, we strongly believe in the Colombian government, we strongly believe that the empowerment of people, the political empowerment of the youth is very important to construct and build agendas around their needs, around their goals, including the digital transition. The private sector, sometimes because, with the dynamics of life, they disconnect from the aims and the goals of the youth. So there's very important to empower the youth in structural institutional structures that can how do you say that? That can influence the private sector, the legislation, and the legislation of the country, and the private sector, of course. So here in Colombia, what we are doing right now is we establish some youth councils, democratically elected, and some youth platforms formed by communities and civil organizations of young people in Colombia, so they can talk and dialogue with the private sector, empowered by votes, of course, and they can talk with private sector and political institutions to build agendas. That I think that's a very important way that we think in Colombia. That's a very important way to modify and transform the lives of youth people and citizens in general.
Yes, and if I can add, I think the role of the private sector is, of course, absolutely crucial. I mean, in the whole discussion about, like I said, of making sure that young people have the type of skills that will actually enable them to find a job and follow and actually or create their own jobs, so to say, you actually know that the private sector is key, because they are the ones who form the job market, so to say. So to make sure that they are fully on board of the current challenges and opportunities that young people have is really crucial. I think that as government, we can try to make sure that we constantly involve the private sector, and also imprint on them the realization that exactly as Zeynep said, that it were very often the young people who also were the ones who were able to make that transition towards a digital solution for their company. I talked to a lot of young people. They were the first ones to set up the digital grocery stores. They were the first ones to actually change their business model quickly. So private sector will need to make sure that those skills are available, and they will need to make sure, or need at least in cooperation, of course, with governments, with education, that actually what the demands that they have are connected to the skills that young people learn. And if you actually work based upon your knowledge of what young people need, what their opportunities are, then for private sector, it's absolutely clear. They will need to adapt to this new reality, and they will need to adapt to the opportunities that young people see, because they are the workforce now already, and definitely also for the future. So in the end, I'm sure that that is a no-brainer for everyone, for education, government, private sector, to work together, make sure young people have those skills, and then make sure that actually we adapt and we listen as policymakers, as private sector, to what the opportunities that young people see. And they are the ones who are seeing the innovative and digital solutions now, very often quicker than others.
Zeynep, you want to add something?
Yeah, thank you so much, Fernanda. If I'm only allowed, I just have one follow-up question regarding that. So I'm hearing really, really amazing ideas that I think we will be employing and adding to our policy brief. Thank you so much for these ideas. But the question still, do you think that government can do like something in specific, such as tax reduction, like more facilitated and easier procedures when it comes to the operation of a private sector? Do you think governments should even employ something like that, or do you still think that this should be a conversation between the private sector and used through a conversation coordinated by the government? Or do you think there's like a higher level that the government can really provide for the private sector, like just to encourage them, like, hey, yes, we can see the benefit, but still we are giving you these incentives, so you would move faster towards this direction. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like Taimen, do you like to reply, or I give the floor to someone?
No, sure. I mean, for me, I can only speak, of course, and I'm not more difficult to speak on behalf of, for example, what we are doing in the Netherlands, considering also my mandate is very much on what we do internationally. But there you will see the whole importance of the whole ecosystem. I mean, this is actually essentially, I think, what Zeynep says. A government is, of course, responsible for creating an ecosystem with the right tax incentives and with the right rules and regulations to actually make sure, actually try to nudge the economy in a certain direction. You're right. It's not just not just a dialogue between education and youth and government and the private sector. Of course, there is this whole issue of ecosystem, and I think I'm a bit surprised that you actually expect, honestly, well, that's why these dialogues are good, that from your research you actually think that it's government who should force, so to say, with rules and laws, actually force the more companies to go online. I would think that if they see where the opportunities are, they see where their business is, they see what's going on, they would actually make that transition. And they don't need to be told by government to go online, to change their ways to more digital time. I would actually say, but that they would make that make sure that the adaptation that it actually happens, and that is government and others who should make sure that young people have the right skills, that there is the right ecosystem, the right, as you said, tax system in place to facilitate this move. I would be, yeah, but you please explain to me. I would be. You're actually saying something here in the chat, so I'm reading it. Aha. Okay. Yeah. The whole factor that it might be a cultural thing that companies are afraid to make that move. That is that you hear a lot. I think it's very difficult to change that culture through laws and regulations. I think once again that here indeed a dialogue would also be something that is more fruitful, with young people leading the way. But so I'm struggling a bit how to answer this question, because but I do acknowledge that it is indeed a cultural challenge as well. But Zeynep, please advise us what you would see as some sort of policy or some sort of rules or that would give that companies that push towards the direction where you know they should be going, but they might be afraid to go.
Can I speak? Is this fine?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so this finding is because I work on economic empowerment in Egypt. I work with private sectors, and I already explored this. So this is not only confirmed by the research that we conducted with YAR, but it's also confirmed by other research that I have worked on. And it's just, you know, like I'm speaking also from like an Arab states mindset. They still have this culture that an employee should be there from 9 to 5. As a government, what I have recommended in previous studies, that whenever you offer them with tax reduction, I'm sorry, can you please? Yeah, so when you are offering them tax reduction, they start looking on the idea of okay, well maybe this is the direction, and after they start going on the road of digital transition, they can see the benefit because in our research we found that 33% of the sample, they have never used online platforms before, never, and this was like across 19 countries. So I totally agree with you. If they see the benefit, they would go there, but most of them, they didn't use the platforms before. They are not really acquainted with the idea of you can really be more productive if you are working digitally, because they didn't try it before. So it's just this first push of tax reduction, more facilitated procedures when it comes to their operating, you know, because in some countries, like if you are operating online and really reducing, you know, like footprint and all of this, the government can offer you, you know, like more benefits, more privilege. I see them, they start looking at the idea of digital transition as a really something that matters to them.
To share a policy we are developing in Colombia, because yeah, I think we can all agree that some societies have lagged behind some 21st century challenges. We implement in Colombia a program that is called Shake Yourself. It's a kind of a center that can help young people to articulate or to develop skills precisely to confront the challenges or different challenges of the new 21st century that we're facing. In these centers, the young people, we have to locate almost more than 300 centers in all Colombia, focus on young people to develop skills and develop their potentialities so they can face the different challenges of the 21st century, like in just like economy, politics, arts, and technology. Yeah, I think it's very important that the young people, the government tries policies, tries formation to form the young people. So they can also assume their challenges. I'm sorry to repeat the word, but that's a very important item in this question that they are asking us. So yes, I think the government should invest budget or resources in capabilities for the young people in that way.
Great. Thank you very much also, Juan Carlos. I wonder if Sue, you want to add some other points to the discussion, or we can jump for the next question.
Yeah, I'd just like to quickly say that I don't know what the geographic breakdown of this resistance is, but we do have to remember that the digital divide is probably a fairly significant component in terms of some of the resistance to moving digital. And I think we also need to remember that there's a lot of people in the world that don't want products delivered in a digital way too. So to some extent, we do need to move things online because that gives us convenience and allows us to do things that we couldn't do, for example, during a pandemic. But we also need to think about the different kind of cultural and geographical situations. And so the cost of doing business on the internet in some countries would be astronomically high simply because the internet costs are high. So obviously they wouldn't want to move that way because it wouldn't necessarily be profitable. So I think maybe, I don't know if there's any way to correlate your data with the digital divide in some way and see whether or not the resistance aligns with countries where there's a high cost or unreliability of internet too, because you don't want your business to fail because all of a sudden your internet drops out and whatever transaction you were doing doesn't work. And this could also be resistance to people for using your product, because if it fails, then they don't get what they're buying. So I don't know if that could be done with the data, but it might be an interesting comparison.
And Fernanda, is it okay if I say one more thing? Because I think Zeynep put in a good effort to also explain. And I think what we just heard as well, the digital divide could indeed be part of it. But I do want to say thank you also for raising the point, because I actually, that approach to say that you need to force, so to say, the digital move, actually, if I understand it correctly, to make sure that you're closer to there where the opportunities of young people are, who are more often the ones who know how to work digitally. And then that it would be a positive thing to actually make sure to force private sector, so to say, she mentioned it, towards the young people in that way. It is perhaps indeed a way that I didn't entirely look at it yet, also because of the challenges with the digital divide and because of some of the challenges that we see with moving digitally, also for young people. But again, I want to thank Zeynep and you all for raising that point, because I think it is an interesting way to look at it as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for everyone. Now we have a new question coming from Patricia Ahanda. So Patricia, you can ask your question.
Hi, I'm not sure if Patricia is still inside. I think she had some internet issues, but in just a second, I should be able to ask it for her. So her question goes towards COVID-19 has worsened the difficulties of accessing education, mainly for girls. So data shows that at least 1.6 million young people could not go to school for some parts of 2020, with about 80% of those girls. Our question now is, how can governments, youth organizations, and the private sector mobilize opportunities for digital technology to ensure better educational outcomes for young girls and promote gender equality? Yeah.
Just before the answer, I would like to remind everyone who is not speaking to mute the microphone so we can have a clear sound, but thank you for your question. Whoever wants to start answering.
Sorry, Fernanda, did you get the question or should I come again?
I had some trouble listening to you. It had some cuts. If you can repeat the question for me, it would be easier to.
Okay, so she said COVID-19 has worsened access to education, particularly for young girls. At some point in 2020, 1.6 million, 80% of 1.6 million young people that were out of school, they were girls. So the question is, how can governments, youth organizations, and the private sector create more opportunities for digital technology, through digital technology, to improve education outcomes for girls and promote gender equality?
Perfect. Now the sound was great. Very good question. I think the gender divide, the digital divide, they are all together. So I'm inviting Juan Carlos or Taiman or Sue, who wants to start answering this question. I think that was made by Patricia in the voice of Awal.
Maybe I can start, Fernanda. I think that maybe you would benefit from linking up a little bit with the Global Learning Group, because one of their findings from their research was particularly related to online education and one of the specific issues that young women struggle with. And they had a very significantly, a statistically significant finding that young women have a much lower access to devices on which to access online learning. So in households where there's a limited number of devices, young boys and teenage boys are getting to use the devices a lot more than girls. So that means even when the education is delivered digitally, that women still have this access issue, particularly related to how are they going to get onto the internet. So I think that it's not actually just about educational resources and opportunities. It's actually necessary to understand the specific barriers for young women. And this is only one, because of course the research only asked, I don't know, 20 or 30 questions, and a detailed research delving into some of the experiences of young women would be necessary to understand this. But I think the group would be happy to share their information with you if that could be useful. I think secondly, we need to look again at this issue about if we want to promote gender equality and young women don't have access to devices, or there are digital divide issues as well, is only looking at digital solutions the right way to go? And I think digital solutions for young people are great, but I also think that we need to recognize in this world that that's not the only solutions, and that for youth-led action to be successful everywhere, it's not always going to be the answer. So I would just like you to, I'll connect you with the learning group though after this.
Great, a great input and an opportunity of sharing the work of UNESCO. And I'm very happy now to invite someone else, or Juan Carlos or
Okay.
Time. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree that the digital solutions are not the only way. We can work in two fronts, you know, from governments and with the help of private sector sometimes too. We have to work in accessibility to internet. Sometimes it's very hard to put in every single home a connection to internet, but we can do community centers connected with internet, where young people can gather and can access to platforms and institutional plans of education. That's very important to work on that. And I think all the governments are working on that, especially in large territories where there's too many rural population. Devices, accessibility, you know, giving the devices to the young people is a great idea, but sometimes it's very expensive, you know, the economical efforts to give to every single student a computer or a tablet. Well, governments are trying to do that, but in these community centers, you can, or with the help of educational educational institutions, you can have a program of different devices available. Like in a library, you can take a book, take it to your home, use it, and then you take it back so other students can use it. That would be a solution we're implementing in Colombia quite a long time ago, and it's working a lot. But presentiality is very important too. I know we're having difficult times. The pandemic has brought us a lot of challenges, but interaction and physical activities, and mostly in young children and in the youth, is very important too. We have to combine access to technology, and somehow, with all the precautions and the security and the biosecurity precautions, we have to start. We have to return to presentiality with the children, because, of course, after pandemic, there are new ways to interact. There are new ways to ahead to education, and there are so many research that you have exposed to address those new ways that after COVID-19, or in times of COVID-19, we're going to work on, or to work on. But I would invite to combine solutions with in a context of limited resources, digital solutions, but little by little, step by step, going back to presentiality. I think we think is very important for the development of youth.
Okay, thank you, Juan Carlos. Timon, would you like to answer as well?
Well, yes, I think it is. It's a good point. Generally, it would be an enormous shame if we don't manage to make the digital gap for girls smaller, because in the sense, there was already with education, there was a larger barrier for girls, whether it was the transportation towards school, the safety at school, hygiene, and all other issues. There was actually bigger barriers for girls that are still there also for physical schools, which is and then now when we're seeing it going digital, you again see, as was mentioned, that young girls have less opportunities to go online, maybe specifically in because of lack of devices, and then maybe the boy gets or the young man gets a chance for the device first. Sometimes, with certain conservative elements who would not want girls without a male presence to be online, which is another big challenge. So it is really a shame if it is a shame that actually now digitally we are seeing this gap that we also see physically. And it's also about, of course, making sure that young girls have the right skills and the opportunity to actually follow digital education. There is a report, another report, maybe you can look at that as well, from Plan International. I think it's called the Truth Gap, and it's about social media and disinformation and things like that, but also specifically how it targets online young people, young girls and young women specifically, through misogyny and through online hatred, so to say. So that is another challenge that girls see. I think next Monday is actually International Girls' Day. So that will also be an important moment for us to emphasize the importance of digital literacy. So for young girls specifically.
Thanks, Simon. If I could follow up, Fernanda, the question, particularly targeting Juan Carlos's points about community centers where young people come together to access internet rather than, since it might not be very practicable to ensure that there's sufficient internet access in all homes. Now, I'm just wondering, particularly as it affects like young girls and women, how can we make those community centers gender sensitive, yeah? So we can ensure that even if something like that was created in local communities, girls would feel safe to come there and also have access to the devices as well, because I'm assuming those centers may probably not be sufficient for the teeming need population, and girls might still stay away from those centers because they might not find it as a safe space for them. So how can we make this kind of community centers or shared internet spaces gender sensitive?
Sure. We have to work on that a lot because effective, just like you say, it's very hard. It's very hard with limited resources. Very hard to give access to all the population. And girls, yes, we have a gap between boys and girls, very pronounced in all the societies. That's not a exclusive phenomenon of Latin America. That's in all countries. I think we have this kind of problem. The solution for that, or how we can address that, is what I said at the beginning of my intervention. I think it's important to empower the youth with a political agenda that can include not only gender's issue, but all gaps or all difficulties that youth is facing in this world, and in these challenges of the world. So to answer your question very clearly, I think that the empowerment of the political and social empowerment of the young people with equality of participation of girls here in Colombia, where I was talking to you about the youth councils, is for law. In the law is established that the lists that put their go to participate in the election have to be like a separate list, like girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy. And that helps, maybe not in the short term, but in the long term, that we can empower a new generation with equality of gender that can build agendas for themselves, and for the new generation that comes ahead. Today, the political culture, if we can say, the boys or the men are they have a special weight in the political life. But if we start a new culture where we include with equal participation girls and boys in these youth councils, that eventually they're going to go to the Congress, and eventually they're going to go to post their names for the other community, like community charge, like mayor of the town, and even presidency. We can achieve that. We can achieve that equality between men and women. I think. We think.
Thank you very much. Right now, we can pass through another question from our audience. I'll give the floor to Mohamed Touré.
Allô? Oui, bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonjour à tous. Oui, j'aimerais savoir qu'est-ce qu'on peut envisager pour le continent africain, vu que les politiques africaines ne misent pas beaucoup là-dessus. Merci.
Pardon, Mohamed, on n'a pas pu entendre votre question.
J'aimerais
Est-ce que vous
savoir,
pouvez l'écrire sur le site? Oui, dites à nouveau.
j'aimerais savoir quelle est la stratégie qui peut être la meilleure pour l'Afrique, vu que nos politiques, nos décideurs ne se penchent pas assez sur la question.
Ok. Donc, quelles sont les meilleures stratégies pour l'Afrique puisque vos décideurs ne se penchent pas trop sur la question? So what Mohammed wants to know, which strategies would you think for Africa? Because he thinks that his government, the governments of Africa, of all the countries, they are not so interested about this question of youth. Mohamed, si vous pouvez enlever votre microphone parce qu'il y a trop de bruit derrière, s'il vous plaît. So I don't know if someone wants to jump in because it's a very particular question. We are talking about the whole continent and where I think Mohammed is a little bit worried about the people that's deciding about youth in the country. I don't know if Sue, you have any ideas how to answer. He thinks that in Africa they don't have enough discussion about the role of youth and how come they can engage with youth.
Okay, it's not just in Africa, Mohammed. It's an issue around the world because very much so in Asia, and it's not an easy one to have a solution for, because on the one hand we often have quite structured and hierarchical societies that think that decisions should be made by experienced and senior people, and youth aren't necessarily given a place to be around the table. But then on the other hand, often there's also not a lot of attention on youth specific issues. And the pandemic is a really good example, because youth, and I think Gabriella said this in her opening remarks, youth were thought to be not going to be particularly affected by the pandemic, so governments didn't allocate resources to youth in relation to COVID. And now we're finding out that youth are more and more involved. I really like the idea from Juan Carlos about building this partnership between government and youth through kind of recognized youth structures that will be part of government planning. And it does take time, but I think that you need to start having a conversation. You need to find the place where you can start having the conversation with the government. In places where you already have an official youth council, it may not be perfect, because, you know, my experience of youth councils is that they often recruit quite elite youth, and they don't necessarily connect to rural youth or disadvantaged youth and other things like that. So this is where youth activism, I think, can play a really key role, is trying to work to build the capacity of youth councils from the one side to be representative of youth, and to make sure that these messages get through into the mainstream conversation. I know we don't have youth councils in all of the world. I think we have them in something like 65, 70% of countries now. So I think that is a mechanism. And I guess in Africa, maybe there's a few countries. The second one I would suggest for Africa specifically would be through the African Union. And the African Union does have a program related to youth, and does have the ear of the policymakers in the region. So trying to build that relationship through, and the reason that I suggest that is because they have a relationship with government to be able to get that space to create conversations with government. And of course, all large institutions are a little bit bureaucratic and also have their issues in connecting to. But you know, I think it's good to try to use these various pathways. And if you can think of other organizations that are influential, and it could be one of the speakers mentioned Plan International. Plan International in Africa is doing some very good work on youth advocacy and policy making, linking up with existing organizations that have the relationship with government is a way to try to help you foster your relationship with government so that you can also be heard. So you need to maybe do some research in different countries, but I would actually look for those people that already have that and see how you and your youth groups and your youth activism can potentially partner with them and use their existing access.
Yeah, and for my side, of course, it is a bit of a broad point, but a very important point. But indeed, in our strategy, like I said, we call it Youth at Heart. And what we try to do is we try to connect those issues of education and work to the issue of the voice of young people. Because we notice that it's really impossible to talk about these subjects separately. So maybe that is also something that could work for you, you know, looking, actually trying to see at all different levels, try to make sure that there is a certain level of participation. So if you can work, it doesn't always, participation doesn't always automatically mean political participation at the highest level. It could mean that, but indeed, as Sue said, sometimes these official youth councils that exist very often can be a bit elitist, although they can have a lot of merit. You can actually try to find out where, at all these different levels, where the conversation is going on. Because I do notice, also in my work, that there are quite a lot of avenues for young people to speak. But indeed, it is true. Very often you do see that there is a political structure that is not very open, or an economic political structure that is not very open to young people. And the fact that you see that sometimes there is an enormous age gap between leaders and the average age of population, sometimes an age gap of 50 years, of 5 decades. It's tremendous. And I always add, it doesn't mean that an older person, as I am myself as well, cannot be bothered about young people. Of course they can. They can actually work very hard on the voice of young people, on education, on youth employment, on climate, etc. But it is often a sign that structures are closed and are very difficult for young people to get their foot into the door. But I think, as Sue also mentioned, really try to look for those platforms that already exist, civil society, youth groups that are activists, that are really using their voice. Local governments sometimes are also open. So try to look at different level how you can connect your voice and your opinion to those issues that are out there, employment and education, on which even governments that you mentioned are actually aware that they need to work on it, and they will find out that it's better, more effective if they work on those issues, if they actually do it with young people as partner, because then they can adapt it to their reality. So I hope that you're able to find different entry points, but I do agree with Sue. There are quite a few, but I also agree with you. The structure is not. It's not easy to get your foot in.
I know it's hard. It's very difficult to gain this, but I think there are some similarities between Africa and Latin America. You know, so the first thing I would like to say to you is young people need to raise their voice. That's very important, because, you know, here in Latin America, we have problems, corruption problems that exclude ideas, movements, communities. And I think in Africa, they lived some problems with corruption too. The second I want to say is that I insist in building structures. I know that it's a very long term and it takes a lot of time to build political culture of inclusion, but you have to put rules, because I agree that these the youth councils can can be reserved for some privileged people. What we did in Colombia to avoid that, or to gain success in the process, was to make rules for that. How do you participate in the council? As I said before, was the zipper list: girl, boy, girl, boy, girl, boy. But also we established some rules who can participate. So we established a 40% of the list had to be from communities, from not parties, communities, organizations in the territorial areas that had ideas. Before that, we built a system of youth platforms in the whole wide country. For the parties, we only reserved the 30% where they gather, of course, the privilege, but we reserve only 30% for them. And for victims, in Colombia, and I think in Africa, we have similarities in that too. We have conflicts that unfortunately bring us victims. We reserved a percentage of the participation too, and ethnicity communities too. So if you establish some rules for this participation, I know rules are not the greater idea for development, liberty, and in the democracy, but sometimes for a start, you have to put some rules to gain inclusion and build policy inclusion policies in the long term. And with the difference of Europe and maybe the United States and some development countries in Latin America and in Africa, I think we have too many exclusion issues that we can approach them, and we can overcome them with some rules. And to make those rules, you have to implement social dialogue with people in the territory. We invite governments to go to the territories, and of course, the youth should raise their voice so the government go to the territory. Sometimes this is not always is a peaceful a peaceful process. It involves some social conflict and protesters, and well, that's democracy. The government should listen to the protesters, the youth, sit with them in the territories and build agendas, and with some rules to guarantee somehow, at least in the short and the long term, guarantee some inclusion for the young people with all the diversity.
Amazing. Thank you, Juan Carlos. I think this share best practice, like Sue was recommending from the first answer she gave, and all the things that have been made, the suggestions are very good. And I would like to invite Awel and Zinab, since both come from Africa and they are youth, if they can also share with Mohammed their experience being youth leaders, youth activists in their countries, what they can add to Mohammed to inspire the action.
Thanks, Fernanda. Interesting conversation so far. I wouldn't say the African governments are not doing anything. Because in my own experience over the last couple of years working across youth peace and security in Africa, we have actually gotten one or two, we've made some significant progress. Actually, over the last 1 year, I've been among a group of youth peace builders that have been engaging the African Union, kind of like what Sue said. Also the African Union's Youth Envoy, as well as African Union's Youth Program on Peace and Security, just trying to advocate for like a better space for young people to work closely and to be integrated in the peace and security architecture. I've also been really very involved here in Nigeria, also pushing for like a national action plan that takes advantage of young people's skills and experience in promoting peace and security in the country. So I don't think like there are not platforms for young to be involved in governance across Africa. And I actually don't think fully that governments are not doing anything. That's what I would say. I think they're doing a bit, but a lot still needs to be done really in terms of creating better spaces and ensuring that they are utilizing those voices of young people across the continents. From our research, what I feel about African governments, particularly in terms of COVID-19, is the fact that they haven't taken into cognizance the needs of young people and acted accordingly. So from our sample, when we collected data from youth actors, youth organizations from Nigeria to Benin to Malawi to Uganda, you could just see that African governments swept the young people's interests under the carpet during, in terms of responding to COVID-19. So dramatic lockdowns, social distancing measures, shutdown of schools. Unfortunately, youth across Africa are oftentimes working in the informal economy. So that means that they are earning money from working on a daily basis. So shutdowns did not consider this impact on young people's economies and also like the work that youth organizations are doing. So there are very little to no palliatives from organizations working in Uganda or in Kenya or in Nigeria. They received little support from the governments in terms of, in terms of helping them to sustain their actions, whatever they may be, whether it was in terms of entrepreneurship or non-profit action, amongst other things. That was something that really came out very clearly in the sense that we didn't see so much support from the government, particularly when something of this magnitude hits. Another major problem that I think cuts across Africa that also came out through our research is very, very poor internet infrastructure across the continent. So unfortunately, everybody had to transition to remote learning. And just like what at the same time, so most likely from across Africa, from particularly February, I think Nigeria was the first country in sub-Saharan Africa to have a COVID-19 infection. So from February 2020, all of the African countries, at least sub-Saharan African countries, started instituting lockdowns. And most of them didn't have any kind of plan at all for remote education, for ensuring that children will continue their education. So some countries were carrying out programs over radio, and then some were doing it on TV. But then even across radio, which is one of the most listened, the best mediums for information in Africa, even in rural areas, most young people in rural areas were cut out of it because they couldn't afford radios. And then again, when some schools later on, after a couple of months, they started carrying out remote education on Microsoft Teams and WhatsApp and Zoom. A lot of people also didn't have these devices. Then what we also saw was that teachers across Africa were not prepared to carry out remote education or teaching via those technological platforms. So that was something that really came out very strongly for us. And we feel like African governments could have done better, particularly in working with youth organizations in responding to the pandemic, and also as much as possible supporting their transition to online learning and employment as well. Yeah, thanks. Over to you, Zina. I'm sure you have interesting insights from Mina.
Thank you so much, Alwell. I agree with all of the thoughts that we have just shared. I have two thoughts on that. So I work at Plan International in Egypt, and we have youth boards. We work with a very similar idea of Mr. Kwan for what you mentioned. However, I still think that a better contribution, a better effort should be made in order to activate the voice of youth boards and councils in order to actually contribute the policies and the legal framework regarding policies really touching different aspects in their lives, focus on learning and livelihood. So yes, there are efforts are done from different stakeholders, but definitely after the pandemic, we can see an urgent need for improved efforts from different stakeholders, whether governments, local governments, international organizations such as Plan and other entities, from UN agencies. This collaboration really, it's also requested. So reflecting on our policy brief. When we spoke to different youth-led initiatives representatives, they mentioned that they need their voice to be heard by their governments. And so, because I know you were with us yesterday at the session for sharing the knowledge, So I can give you a very brief distribution for our geographic. So mainly our responses came from Africa, Nigeria, Congo, and we only had like 4 responses from France, and also 1 response from Brazil. So most of the responses actually, they were coming from Africa. And most of the sample, they confirmed that they need their government, they need a better network, a better linkage to the policymakers at their communities to be heard, you know, and also to contribute to the policy that, and as Alwal was saying, thank you so much, Alwal, for highlighting this, because the policies regarding the pandemic, the restrictions, and Plan International, we conducted a research on that. The policies and the restrictions, the response to the pandemic, in most of the countries around the world, youth were not consulted regarding the restrictions imposed by the government. The impact on their life, I totally understand it was a matter of crisis. We are at a time to save our lives, but again, did the policymakers consider youth reflections on these restrictions? Were they consulted? Maybe if we have a better engaged youth councils, maybe they would have contributed to formulating these policies to respond to the COVID. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. So we are almost in the end of our session, and I would like to ask everyone in the panel, so Zina, Bawel, Timon, Juan Carlos, and Sue, to give one last line. What is the main message you want to keep from this conversation we had today? So very quick, just to have a meaningful ending for this session.
Hi, Fernanda. If I could, although I have one burning question, I don't know if I could still ask it. I really would have loved to hear the insights from the policy experts. But one big takeaway for me here is that going forward in terms of bridging the digital divide for young people in terms of education and employment, it's important for young people to be included in whatever policies are coming out of government, and also like any kind of intervention that's coming out from the private sector as well as international organizations. So youth councils, but most importantly, youth-led organizations working at community levels, and as well as in regional and district levels as well. They should have a strong voice in the formulation of the policies that affects them. I also did learn that we have to start thinking creatively about this digital divide. So it might not be feasible to get technologies and devices into the hands of everybody, but how can we take advantage of community action that are different communities and see how to bridge this gap as much as possible? So community centers, like it's happening in Colombia, and also innovative pushes for the private, or incentives for the private sector to be able to, as much as possible, support youth-led action. But if I may, just one question, if we have some time. I see we're supposed to close in 5 minutes. I just really wanted to find out about funding for youth-led action. Yeah, our finding showed that 91% of the organizations we surveyed, they said funding was their major problem that prevented them from scaling up their impact in these communities. And I just wanted to ask from policy experts how youth action or youth organizations can be better funded. Thanks.
You can, the panelists can add to your final idea the answer to this question. Mohammed,
Fernanda, I can make. Yes. I wanted to make your life easy and answer this question and yes. do my last final sentence.
Word.
Yes. No, the last point that Alwal made is an important one indeed, and I know from the research that came out as well. So I think it merits and it deserves an answer. As indeed, we also see how difficult it is, also from the Netherlands, to support sometimes youth-led organizations. This is also because of all the different rules and regulations that exist, and the heavy administrative burden, so to say, that could be on young organizations. So I think I try to be more flexible in this. I try to work from the government to be more flexible toward youth-led organizations. But I think there's more or less 2 ways to approach it. On the one hand, there is really try to work with other larger partners, you know, the ones that were already mentioned today. And then position yourself as a youth organization as a sort of a sub organization, you know, integrated within, but to make sure that for the funding, you're actually partner with perhaps a larger organization. That is one way in which we see in our programming that more and more youth-led organizations are actually part of sort of consortia of organizations. Secondly, we need to adapt our systems as governments to make sure that it actually works for young people as well. And that is more, you know, that's a technical and administrative answer, but that is true. And that it is something that came from your research. It's something that came from our Youth at Heart research as well, that these youth-led organizations, to support them, we need to work on that. So generally, and I'll immediately close off with my remarks as well. I think what I took away, apart from this important point as well, what I took away is that really no surprises. The digital future is real. The digital reality is real. But so is the digital divide, and the fact that we need to be careful not to make that larger. And how do we do that? We need to adapt to the reality of young people. And how do we do that? Let's start by asking young people, as we do in this session now, but generally get into the habit of asking young people, involving them in decision-making, listening, maybe where possible, strengthening their voice, and work more with young people as partners to actually make sure that we adapt to the reality. And there were a couple of points made today that really, for me, were another reminder of the reality. So thanks for that.
Juan Carlos, if you can join already, since the time is almost over.
Yes, I agree. Well, I think that youth policies must be embraced at the highest level of government, with law and proper funding with public resources. Here in Colombia, these youth councils are backed by all the ministerial staff of the President of the Republic, and they follow all the in the highest level of government. They follow up all the agenda of these councils and these youth platforms too. So that makes the representative youth structures binding for you know, to pursue the purposes. So our call or our invitation is not just build this, promote this community or youth councils. So what ideas can they do? No. It has to be a political purpose from the highest level of government, led by the President of the Republic, all his ministers, and should go to the territory with founding and with agendas that susceptible to be watched and budget in the public, with the public funding, with the public resources. That's our call. I think it's very important. I wish I would like to go with that invitation for our panelists and for the youth who's watching us. We have to build structural institutionality around the youth.
Great. Now we move on with Sue to give her brief final message, and then we're gonna close with Zinab. Thank you.
Okay, so I want to just quickly touch on the funding question too, because you're right, it comes up every time. But honestly, if I have some money from UNESCO to give to youth groups, and you're sitting out there waiting for money for your project, and another group is going, and maybe they're not doing anything really big, but they're active and they're doing things, I'm going to give the money to the group that is already doing things, that is already showing their commitment and their action. And it might mean you scale down and you start with little things, but it's important that you demonstrate that you can get things done, you can have impact. And then you're going to put yourself ahead of other people, because all funding is always going to be competitive, because there's so many youth groups out there doing it. So you have to think of a way to differentiate yourself from all of the other groups and make yourself attractive to the person with the money. And I would say showing your commitment, showing your action is the way to do that. And in terms of summing up from the comments, it's a great project, and I want to commend you all again for the commitment that all of you have shown for so long, being part of the Youth as Researchers process. I know it's been quite hard for many of you, and the fact that you're here at the end is in itself a fantastic achievement of all of you. Your research is a really interesting topic, and I totally agree that this digital transformation and the role that youth can play, plus the impact it can have to escalate and upscale what youth can achieve, is quite critical, because you can take what was a small project and you can make it much bigger. I think for me, key elements to come out of the discussion is about co-design, working with partners, finding the access points, and using your data. And so collaboration, bringing the youth voice together to strengthen the youth voice, because you've found that there's this common messages from your data. So how do you actually now use that as a collaboration, or a way to demonstrate the strength of youth, or the commonality of youth, to actually make more impact with the recommendations? So good luck with the next stages, and look forward to reading the written up product next.
Zinab?
Thank you so much, everyone. That has been a very, very interesting conversation. So imagine if policymakers can sit down with youth and discuss all of these great ideas that we have just discussed in an hour and 30 minutes. I think that COVID, yes, it brought us with a lot of hardships, inequalities. But again, I think this is a golden opportunity for us in different countries to really change, and for youth to step up and really contribute to the policies on their community. So yeah, I see this as a double sword. We have hardships, but I think we also have a big opportunity not to miss. Thank you.
Very good. So thank you very much. It was a very, very rich, and I'm so happy to be able to join the discussion as a moderator, meet all of you. Thank you very much for your time, attention, inputs. I think we're gonna have a beautiful report and announcing the December session with a very, very rich perspectives. So thank you very much, and have a great afternoon, evening. I don't know which time zone you are, and see you in this live.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.